I found the papers tucked neatly between the electric bill and a catalog for luxury watches. Divorce documents with David's signature already dried on the dotted line. 15 years of marriage concluded in cold legalese while I'd been at my mother's bedside in hospice care. I stood motionless in our marble kitchen, the kitchen I'd designed 3 years ago during the renovation David had called unnecessarily extravagant. The same kitchen where he'd just deposited these papers without even the courtesy of a conversation. "There's someone else," he'd texted an hour earlier. "It's serious. Papers are on the counter. I'll be staying at the Meridian Hotel until you've had time to process. We can talk when you're ready." Process. As if my marriage ending was simply another project to manage, another item on my to-do list between visiting my dying mother and preparing for my upcoming surgery. The surgeon had found a suspicious mass during my annual mammogram 2 weeks ago. David knew this. He'd held my hand during the biopsy, promised we'd face whatever came next together. Another promise casually discarded, it seemed. I flipped through the divorce agreement, the familiar letterhead of Colton and Byrne jumping out at me. David's law firm. His colleagues had drafted this, probably over drinks and knowing laughter. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached the financial settlement page. Despite my MBA and years as a financial analyst before I'd left my career to support David's, I found myself struggling to focus on the numbers through the fog of betrayal. One paragraph jumped out at me. David would assume responsibility for our shared debts. All of them. Including the remaining $212,000 on my student loans from Wharton that we'd agreed to pay off slowly while prioritizing investments. Including the $86,000 renovation loan for this kitchen with its custom Italian, marble countertops, including the $43,000 in medical bills from last year's emergency gallbladder surgery, my insurance hadn't fully covered. It was unexpectedly generous. Suspiciously so. David Madison didn't make financial decisions without calculating every angle, every potential gain and loss. It was what made him one of Boston's most sought-after corporate attorneys. It was what had attracted me to him in our law school days, his brilliant, strategic mind always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My phone vibrated against the counter. Another text from David. Lauren agreed to take on our debts as part of our new start. She says it's the least she can do considering the circumstances. Lauren. So the other woman had a name, and apparently a savior complex and enough financial resources to casually absorb over $340,000 in someone else's debt. Lauren, who was getting my husband, my house, and my future in one neat package while I stood in my soon-to-be former kitchen with a mother dying across town and a possible cancer diagnosis looming over me like a storm cloud. I set my phone down carefully before the urge to shatter it against the wall became overwhelming. My reflection in the window above the sink showed a woman I barely recognized. Pale, drawn, with dark circles under her eyes from too many nights spent on the fold-out chair in my mother's hospice room. David hadn't visited my mother once in the 3 weeks she'd been there. Now I understood why. I forced myself to breathe deeply, the way my therapist had taught me during the panic attacks that had started after my father's sudden death 2 years ago. Breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 7, out for 8. The fog of shock began to lift slightly, making room for something else. Not quite anger, not yet. Something colder, more calculated. I picked up the divorce papers again, this time reading, every line with the attention I once gave to multi-million-dollar investment portfolios. The settlement was comprehensive, almost suspiciously so. In addition to assuming all our debts, David was offering me our vacation property in the Berkshires and a one-time payment of $175,000. In exchange, I would relinquish any claim to our primary residence, our investment accounts, and his partnership. Shares at Colton and Byrne. It was, by any objective measure, an inadequate settlement given Massachusetts' equitable distribution laws and the length of our marriage. But David knew. just as I did, that prolonged legal battles were expensive. He was betting on my exhaustion, my distraction with my mother's, illness, and perhaps even my diagnosis to push me toward accepting a quick, clean break. The familiar rhythm of problem-solving began to pulse in my mind. For 15 years, I'd channeled my analytical skills into managing our household, into supporting David's career ascent, into navigating the healthcare maze for my parents. I'd become so accustomed to directing my talents toward other people's problems that I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to turn them toward my own. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe. To our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I glanced at the clock. 11:23 p.m. Mom would be asleep now, the night nurse checking her vitals hourly as the cancer that had started in her breast and metastasized to her bones continued its inevitable march. 3 to 6 weeks, the hospice doctor had said. That had been 3 weeks ago. I picked up my laptop from the kitchen counter, the one David had given me for Christmas last year, with a post-it note that read, "For my favorite planner." I opened a new document and titled it simply, Strategy. As AB, I began to type. A sense of calm purpose replaced the initial shock. The lawyer in me, the woman who had graduated second in our class at Harvard Law before choosing a different path, was awakening after a long dormancy. I would need that woman. Now, the strategist, the planner, the one who could see 3 steps ahead. I worked until 3 a.m., making lists, reviewing our financial entanglements, and researching Massachusetts divorce law. When I finally closed my laptop, I had the skeleton of a plan. Not for fighting the divorce. David clearly wanted out, and I had too much pride to cling to someone who could discard me so easily. No, this was a plan for something else entirely. My phone buzzed again. David. Just checking in. Are you okay? Need anything? The audacity was almost admirable. Was I okay? Need anything? Just my dignity, my health, my mother not dying, and my husband not leaving me for someone named Lauren, who was apparently wealthy enough to casually absorb hundreds of thousands in debt. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked upstairs to our bedroom, the room we'd shared for over a decade, and opened David's closet. His scent still lingered among the precisely arranged designer suits and casual wear. I ran my fingers along the sleeve of his favorite, charcoal Tom Ford, the one he wore to close important deals. His power suit, he called it. Half of his clothes were missing, I realized. He'd been planning this, methodically removing his belongings in small batches I wouldn't notice while distracted by my mother's declining health and my own medical concerns. How strategic. How very David. I sat on the edge of our king-sized bed, suddenly bone-tired but knowing sleep wouldn't come. The initial shock was giving way to a cold, clear anger that felt alien and familiar all at once. David had always said, I was too accommodating, too willing to compromise. That's why you need me, he'd joked once during a dinner with his colleagues. Someone has to look out for your interests since you're too busy looking out for everyone else's. He'd been wrong. I wasn't naturally accommodating, I had chosen to be. I had chosen to channel my ambition and intelligence into supporting our partnership, into creating the stable foundation from which he could take risks and pursue opportunities. I had made strategic sacrifices, deferring my own career advancement, for what I believed was our collective benefit. Now, sitting alone in our half-empty bedroom with divorce papers downstairs and a possible cancer diagnosis hanging over me, I recognized that choice for what it was. A miscalculation. A failed investment strategy. My phone lit up with a notification. An email this time, not from David, but from someone named Lauren Westfield. The subject line read simply, I'm sorry. I stared at it for a long moment, my finger hovering over the screen. Then I deleted it without reading. Lauren Westfield didn't get to apologize. Not yet. Not until she understood exactly what she was apologizing for. I opened my laptop again and added a new section to my strategy document. Lauren Westfield. A quick LinkedIn search revealed exactly what I expected. Harvard Business School, executive. VP at Boston Capital Partners. Board member for 3 prestigious cultural organizations. 41 years old, 2 years younger than me, with a smile that radiated confidence and old money. She'd met David 6 months ago when Boston Capital Partners retained Colton and Byrne for a complex acquisition. According to her public Instagram, she'd recently purchased a brownstone in Beacon Hill, a $4.2 million property according to public records. No wonder she could casually offer to absorb our debts. To her, it was pocket change. To me, it had been a carefully managed burden, one more sacrifice in service to our shared future, a future that no longer existed. The hospice center called at 4:30 a.m. Mom was agitated and asking for me. I closed my laptop, splashed cold water on my face, and grabbed my keys. As I drove through Boston's empty pre-dawn streets, my mind continued to race, continued to build, and refine the plan taking shape in my head. By the time I parked at the hospice center, I had made my first decision. I would not sign the divorce papers. Not yet. David wanted a clean, quick break? He would have to wait. I had always been good at waiting, good at playing the long game. It was time to remind my husband of that fact. It was time to remind myself. Mom was awake when I entered her room, her once vibrant face now gaunt and pale against the white pillowcase. But her eyes, my eyes, people always said, were clear and focused. "He's leaving you," she said immediately. Not a question. My mother had always had an almost supernatural ability to read me. I nodded, taking her fragile hand in mine. Yes. For someone else? Yes. She closed her eyes briefly, pain flickering across her features. Whether from the cancer or from my news, I couldn't tell. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice stronger than it had been in days. I looked into my mother's eyes, the woman who had raised me alone after my father abandoned us when I was 7, the woman who had worked 2 jobs to put me through undergraduate school, the woman who had celebrated every one of my achievements as if it were her own. "I'm going to do what you taught me," I answered, squeezing her hand gently. "I'm going to take care of myself." A slight smile curved her lips. "Good," she whispered. "It's about time." As the sun rose over Boston, casting long shadows through the hospice room window, I sat beside my mother's bed making calls. To my doctor, rescheduling my follow-up appointment. To a divorce attorney, not from David's firm, scheduling a consultation for the following day. To my own bank, where I still maintained a separate account my husband didn't know about, checking the balance and discussing withdrawal options. With each call, each small action, I felt my power returning. David had calculated that my mother's illness and my health scare would leave me too vulnerable to fight. He had made a critical error. He had underestimated me. He had forgotten who I was before I became Mrs. David Madison. He had forgotten Sarah Elizabeth Chen, the scholarship student who had worked her way from community college to Harvard Law through sheer grit and relentless determination. The woman who had graduated second in their class, bested only by him. The woman who had turned down a junior partnership at Goldman Sachs to support his career because she believed in their partnership. That woman wasn't gone. She had just been dormant. And now she was wide awake. By noon, as Mom drifted in and, out of sleep, her pain momentarily managed by the morphine drip, I had the outline of a more detailed plan. Not just for survival, but for something more complex, something worthy of the strategic mind David had once admired before he took it for granted. I would sign those divorce papers eventually, but first, I would ensure that when Lauren Westfield so generously took on our debts, she would be getting far more than she bargained for. Much, much more. My phone buzzed with another text from David. The lawyer needs to know when you'll be signing the papers. Lauren and I are hoping to close on a new place next month. I allowed myself a small, cold smile as I typed my response. I'm with Mom at hospice. We'll discuss the papers when she's gone. I need time to process, remember? His reply came almost instantly. Of course, take all the time you need. I'm here if you need anything. I set the phone down and looked at my sleeping mother, the woman who had taught me that true strength often lies in patience, in careful planning, in the quiet accumulation of knowledge and resources. Watch me, Mom, I whispered, though I knew she couldn't hear me through her morphine-induced sleep. Watch what your daughter can do. Outside the hospice window, Boston continued its Monday morning bustle, oblivious to the quiet war being declared in this small, sterile room. David and Lauren thought they had orchestrated the perfect exit strategy. They were about to discover how wrong they were. Because while David might have been the more celebrated lawyer in our marriage, I had always been the better strategist. And now, I had nothing left to lose. The divorce attorney's office occupied the 14th floor of a sleek downtown high-rise, deliberately several blocks away from Colton and Byron, where David held his partnership. Mira Abernathy had come highly recommended by a law school classmate who'd mentioned her reputation for handling complex high-asset divorces with surgical precision. Let me be clear, Mira said, her steel-gray hair pulled back in an immaculate bun as she reviewed the divorce agreement David had left me. This settlement is insultingly inadequate given your circumstances. I nodded, watching as she made notes. With a fountain pen on a yellow legal pad. The hospice center had called that morning. Mom had had a comfortable night, which meant I could focus fully on this meeting. Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state, Mira continued. After a 15-year marriage where you subordinated your career to support his, you're entitled to a far more substantial settlement. She looked up, her eyes sharp behind designer frames. So, why are we here? You mentioned a different approach. I don't want to fight the divorce, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. David wants out. Fine. But I want to control the timing and ensure the actual distribution of debts happens. Strategically. Mira set down her pen, folding her hands on the desk. Explain. For the next 20 minutes, I outlined my emerging plan. Mira's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight raising of her eyebrows, the subtle nod of professional appreciation. It's unorthodox, she said finally, but legally sound, provided we execute each step correctly. She leaned forward. You realize this strategy depends on your husband's new partner being as wealthy as you believe? And on their relationship lasting through the finalizing of the divorce. David doesn't choose partners who aren't financially solid. He's not built that way, I replied. And from what my investigation shows, Lauren Westfield has the resources to absorb these debts 10 times over. Her family owns half of Martha's Vineyard. And if your medical situation... Mira paused delicately. If I have cancer? I finished for her. Then the timeline accelerates, but the strategy remains the same. I handed her a sealed envelope. These are my medical directives and power of attorney documents, just in case. Mira nodded, tucking the envelope into a folder. We'll need to file for a financial restraining order immediately. Given his behavior, there's significant risk he might try to move assets. Already anticipated, I said, sliding across printouts of our account statements. I've been monitoring everything. So far, he's been careful not to touch our joint holdings. He's waiting for you to sign, Mira observed, thinking your vulnerability will make you eager to avoid conflict. A miscalculation on his part. As I left Mira's office, my phone buzzed with a text from the hospice nurse. Mom had asked for me. I texted back that I'd be there within the hour, then made one more stop, at Boston First National, where I'd maintained a separate account since before my marriage. The branch manager greeted me warmly. I'd known Carlos since my analyst days. when I'd helped his daughter secure a competitive internship. "Everything's arranged as you requested, Mrs. Madison," he said, leading me to a private room. Though I must say, it's unusual to convert investments to cash on such short notice. "Unusual times," I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. He slid a cashier's check across the table. 127,583.42. The full balance of my personal account, accumulated carefully over 15 years of marriage through freelance consulting. Projects David had been too busy to notice, and an inheritance from my grandmother he'd forgotten about. "And the safe deposit box?" I asked. Carlos handed me a key. "Box 413, accessible only to you." He hesitated. "Mrs. Madison, forgive me for overstepping, but if you're in any trouble—" "Not the kind you're thinking," I assured him. "Just taking precautions during a life transition." At the hospice center, Mom was having a rare good day. Her pain was manageable and her mind was clear. The hospice doctor had pulled me aside during my last visit to gently remind me that such rallies often preceded a final decline. A cruel gift, clarity before the end. "You look different today," Mom observed as I arranged fresh flowers beside her bed. "More like yourself." I smiled, taking her hand. "I've been making arrangements. For me or for you?" Her directness hadn't diminished with her body's failing. "Both," I admitted. "Mom, there's something I need to ask you." She nodded for me to continue. "The money Dad left when he died. The insurance policy. You never spent it." Mom's lips curved in a knowing smile. "You've been talking to Carlos. The account's still in your name, nearly untouched for 10 years. It was blood money," she said simply. "Your father walked out on us, then had the audacity to die and leave us money as if that made up for everything." She squeezed my hand. "I kept it because throwing it away seemed wasteful, but I never wanted to touch it. It's over $400,000 now, with the investments Carlos helped you make." Mom's eyes, still so sharp despite the morphine, studied my face. "And you want to know if you can use it?" I nodded, suddenly unable to speak past the tightness in my throat. "I already changed the account," she said. 3 weeks ago, when they moved me here. It's in your name now." She paused. "Whatever you're planning, Sarah, make it count." I leaned forward, kissing her papery cheek, breathing in the lavender scent she still insisted on wearing. "I will." As I left the hospice at sunset, my phone vibrated with an incoming call. David. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message as I walked to my car. "Sarah, it's been 5 days. I'm trying to be patient, but we need to move forward with the paperwork. Call me back, please." I deleted the message, starting my car and pulling out into Boston's evening traffic. David could wait. The first pieces of my strategy were falling into place, and timing was everything. Tomorrow, I'd see the surgeon about my biopsy results. Tomorrow, I'd learn if I was fighting for my future or simply securing my legacy. Either way, David and Lauren were about to learn a valuable lesson about debt, about obligation, about the true cost of betrayal. "The mass is benign," Dr. Santos said, her face softening with relief that matched my own. "A complex fibroadenoma, completely non-cancerous." The examination room suddenly felt brighter, the antiseptic smell less oppressive. I'd been holding my breath for so long that the simple act of exhaling felt like shedding a concrete vest. "We should still remove it," she continued, pointing to the ultrasound images displayed on her computer screen. "It's quite large, and while not dangerous, these can be uncomfortable and occasionally painful." I nodded, already mentally calculating how this changed my timeline. "How soon?" "I have an opening next Thursday. Outpatient procedure, you'll be home the same day. Recovery is typically quick, about a week before you're back to normal activities." As Dr. Santos wrote up the surgical orders, I felt a curious emptiness where fear had resided moments before. The diagnosis should have been purely good news, but instead, it felt almost inconvenient. The possibility of cancer had formed a cornerstone of my emerging strategy, the potentially terminal patient whose husband had abandoned her in her hour of need. That narrative had power, both legally and socially. This benign diagnosis complicated things. Not impossible, just different parameters to consider. Ms. Chen? Dr. Santos was looking at me expectantly. I'd apparently missed a question. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I asked if you have someone to drive you home after the procedure. You won't be able to drive yourself. I hesitated. A week ago, the answer would have been obvious. David. Now. Yes, I said finally. I'll arrange something. Outside the medical building, I sat in my car and updated my strategy document on my tablet. The benign diagnosis altered certain elements but reinforced others. I now had more time, more energy, to focus. The crisis that had initially seemed like a devastating blow to my position now revealed itself as an advantage. David didn't know about the diagnosis yet. He still believed I might be facing cancer treatments, still thought I was emotionally paralyzed by the dual crises of my mother's illness and my own health scare. That misconception was valuable. My phone buzzed with a text from him. Any news from the doctor? I stared at the message, considering my response carefully. Finally, I typed, "Still processing everything. With Mom now. Will update when I can." Not a lie, technically. I would be with Mom shortly, and I was still processing, just not in the way he assumed. The strategy was taking clearer shape by the hour. If I couldn't use a cancer diagnosis as leverage, I would use something equally powerful: debt. Not just our existing debts that Lauren had so magnanimously offered to assume, but new, carefully structured financial obligations that David would never see coming. At the hospice center, Mom was sleeping when I arrived. The nurse, Elaine, the one who always saved the good pudding cups for Mom, noticed my lighter expression immediately. "Good news?" she asked quietly as she checked Mom's IV. "The mass is benign," I confirmed. "Surgery next week to remove it, but no cancer." Elaine squeezed my arm. "That's wonderful, honey. Your mama's been worried sick about you, even with everything she's going through." I settled into the chair beside Mom's bed, opening my laptop to continue working while she slept. The hospice center had excellent Wi-Fi, a small mercy for families, spending long hours in waiting. Mom stirred occasionally but didn't fully wake, her breathing shallow but steady. By mid-afternoon, I had completed the first major step in my plan. Working through an attorney friend who specialized in corporate structures, I had established a new LLC, Phoenix Capital Management, with myself as the sole member, but with a complex ownership structure that obscured the connection. The LLC's stated purpose: debt acquisition and management. My next step would require a carefully orchestrated meeting. Just as I was closing my laptop, Mom's eyes fluttered open. "You're looking smug," she observed, her voice raspy. "What mischief are you up to?" "No cancer," I told her, reaching for her hand. "Just a benign mass they'll remove next week." Her smile was radiant despite her gaunt features. "I knew it," she whispered. "I've been praying." "You never told me you prayed," I said, surprised. Mom had always been practical to the point of cynicism, about spiritual matters. "Started recently," she admitted. "Seemed prudent, given the circumstances." Her eyes, still sharp despite the morphine, studied my face. "But that's not why you look like the cat who ate the canary. Tell me." I hesitated, then decided my mother deserved to know. She'd always been my most steadfast ally, my moral compass. If anyone would understand the justice in what I was planning, it would be Elizabeth Chen. For the next 20 minutes, I outlined my strategy in careful detail. Mom listened without interruption, her expression shifting from surprise to admiration, to something like pride. "He always underestimated you," she said when I finished. Even when he claimed to admire your intelligence, he never truly saw it. No, I agreed. He didn't. This plan of yours, Mom continued, it's brilliant, morally questionable in parts, but brilliant. She paused, considering. Are you sure Lauren deserves this? She's not the one who made vows to you. Lauren knew he was married, I replied, the cold anger I'd been nurturing flaring briefly. She pursued him anyway, and more importantly, she's the vehicle through which I can exact the most effective consequences. David values money and status, above all else, so those are the areas where he needs to feel the impact. Mom nodded slowly. Just be careful. Revenge can consume you if you let it. It's not just revenge, I said quietly. It's justice and security. The settlement he's offering would leave me starting over at 43 with nothing but a vacation, property, and a one-time payment that won't last 3 years in Boston. And if I weren't dying? Mom asked bluntly. Would you still do this? The question caught me off guard. I don't know, I admitted. But you are dying, and he left me to face that alone. Mom squeezed my hand with surprising strength. Then, do what you must. Just promise me you'll find happiness when this is done. I promise, I said, though in truth, happiness seemed like a distant, abstract concept, something from another life. Before leaving the hospice, I made a quick call to Mira Abernethy. She answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and businesslike. I've established the LLC, I told her without preamble. The bank accounts are set up. I'm ready for phase 2. The debts need to be transferred within the next 10 business days to maintain the timeline we discussed, she reminded me. And we'll need to file the financial disclosure forms by Friday. I'm meeting with Boston Credit Union tomorrow about the HELOC, I confirmed. Everything else is proceeding as planned. After hanging up, I drove straight to the address I'd found in my research. The small accounting firm occupied a modest office in Cambridge, far from the prestigious financial district where David's connections held sway. Jonathan Weiss had been my classmate at Harvard, brilliant with numbers but socially awkward enough that he'd never broken into the elite circles David frequented. Jonathan's eyes widened when I walked into his office unannounced. Sarah Chen? My God, it's been, 15 years? Something like that, I agreed, accepting his awkward hug. I need your help, John. Discreetly. For the next hour, we discussed the financial aspects of my plan. Jonathan asked precise, technical questions, occasionally wincing at the boldness of certain elements, but nodding with professional appreciation at the structure. It's technically legal, he confirmed when I finished outlining the strategy. Ethically gray in places, but legally sound provided you maintain the appropriate corporate veil between entities. He leaned back in his chair. David really did. A number on you, huh? You have no idea, I replied, surprised by the emotion that suddenly threatened to choke me. John and I had never been close friends, but we'd studied together often enough that he'd seen how besotted I'd been with David Madison, the golden boy, the charismatic future star who'd somehow chosen the serious, intense scholarship student as his girlfriend. For what it's worth, John said quietly, he was always a pretentious ass. We all wondered what you saw in him. I smiled despite myself. Charm, ambition, and great bone structure can be very persuasive when you're 23. Jonathan agreed to work with me, his rates surprisingly reasonable. As I left his office, the sun was setting over the Charles River, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. I stopped for a moment on the bridge, watching the rowers glide through the water with metronome precision. My phone buzzed. David. Again? It's been a week, Sarah. The lawyers are asking questions. Can we please just talk? Dinner tomorrow? Your choice of restaurant. I considered ignoring him again, but phase 2 required a different approach. The time for silent treatment had passed. Now I needed to engage, carefully, strategically. I typed my response. Surgery scheduled for next Thursday. Benign mass, not cancer. Having dinner with Melissa tomorrow. Could do lunch at Sorelina at 1. His reply came almost instantly. Wonderful. News about the diagnosis. Sorelina at 1 works. See you then. I pocketed my phone, continuing my walk across the bridge. Selecting Sorelina was deliberate. It was where we'd celebrated our 10th anniversary, where the staff knew us as regulars, where David had connections with the management. Public, but comfortable. A place where he would feel confident, where he would assume he controlled the dynamic. That night, I returned to the empty house, our house, for the first time in days. I'd been staying in a hotel near the hospice center, avoiding the painful emptiness of the home we'd built together. But now, I needed to gather certain documents to prepare for tomorrow's performance. The house felt different, as if David's betrayal had altered its very atmosphere. I moved through the rooms like a visitor in a museum, noting the gaps where he'd removed his favorite books from the shelves, the empty spaces where certain photographs had stood. In my bedroom, I opened the safe hidden behind the abstract, painting David had always hated. Inside were our important documents, property deeds, insurance policies, the prenuptial agreement we'd signed at his insistence despite my having few assets to protect at the time. I removed what I needed, then turned to my closet. For tomorrow's lunch, I would need the right armor. My fingers found the Chanel suit I'd worn to David's partnership ceremony 3 years ago. Dove gray with black trim, elegant, but not flashy. He'd always appreciated that I knew how to dress, the part of a law partner's wife. Stylish enough to reflect well on him, but never ostentatious enough to outshine him. As I laid out the suit, my phone rang. Not David this time, but the hospice center. My heart stuttered as I answered. Ms. Chen? It's Dr. Lakeland from hospice. Your mother has taken a significant turn. Her breathing has changed, and we're seeing signs that transition may be beginning. You might want to come in. The transition. Such a gentle euphemism for the approach of death. I'll be right there, I said, already reaching for my keys. The night that followed was a vigil of whispered reassurances and gentle touch. Mom drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes recognizing me, sometimes speaking to people long gone, her own mother, my father, childhood friends. By dawn, her breathing had stabilized somewhat, though Dr. Lakeland warned me the reprieve was likely temporary. Days, not weeks, he said kindly, but she's fighting hard. She always has, I replied, brushing Mom's thin hair back from her forehead. I called Mira from the hospice hallway, explaining the situation. We may need to accelerate certain aspects of the plan, I told her. My mother likely won't last the week. I'm sorry, Mira said, genuine compassion in her voice. Do you want to postpone the meeting with David? I considered the question, watching a family down the hall receive what appeared to be difficult news from another doctor. No, I decided. In fact, this development works in our favor. I'll see him as planned. When I ended the call, I found Dr. Lakeland waiting to speak with me. Your mother's DNR is in order, he confirmed, and her wishes regarding extraordinary measures are clear. Is there anything else you need from our team? I thought of the conversation Mom and I had had just yesterday, her blessing for my plan, her understanding of the justice I sought. No, I said quietly. She's made her wishes very clear. By noon, Mom had stabilized enough that I felt comfortable leaving for my lunch with David. I changed into the Chanel suit in the hospice's small bathroom, applied makeup to disguise the exhaustion of the night's vigil, and steeled myself for the performance ahead. As I drove to Sorelina, I mentally rehearsed the role I needed to play, the wounded but dignified wife, the woman too preoccupied with personal crises to focus on legal strategies, the soon-to-be ex who just wanted things resolved quickly and painlessly. It was, perhaps, not entirely a performance. Part of me did want this over with, did want to sign those papers and never see David Madison's handsome, treacherous face again. But that part was overruled by the strategist, the planner, the woman who understood that sometimes justice required patience. And so I parked near the restaurant, checked my reflection once more, and prepared to face the husband who had discarded me like an asset whose value had depreciated. David, who had always prided himself on his ability to read people, to anticipate their moves in negotiations, was about to discover that he'd never truly known his wife at all. Soralina's interior was all warm wood and soft lighting, even at lunch. The maitre d', Paolo, who had served us dozens of times over the years, greeted me with genuine warmth that cooled noticeably when David's name was mentioned. "Mr. Madison is already seated," he said, a hint of disapproval in his voice. Word traveled fast in Boston's small, interconnected social circles. Clearly, Paolo had heard something about our situation. David stood as I approached the table, his expression a careful mask of concern and relief. He was wearing the navy Tom Ford suit I'd given him for his 45th birthday, a calculated choice, no doubt. He knew I'd always thought he looked his best in it. "Sarah," he said, leaning in, for what would have normally been a kiss. I turned slightly, transforming it into an awkward half-embrace before taking my seat. "You look well," he added, surprise evident in his tone. He'd expected the haggard woman he'd glimpsed at the house a week ago, not this polished, composed version. "Thank you," I replied, accepting the menu from Paolo. The news about the mass being benign was a relief. "I can't tell you how happy I was to hear that," David said, his voice dropping into the sincere register he used with reluctant clients. "I've been worried sick." I allowed myself a small, cool smile. "Yes, I imagine a cancer diagnosis would have been quite inconvenient for your timeline." He flinched, then recovered quickly. "That's not fair, Sarah. Whatever's happening between us, I would never want you to be ill." "Of course not," I agreed, scanning the wine list though I had no intention of drinking. "How's the Meridian? Still charging $14 for orange juice with breakfast?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not at the Meridian anymore. I'm staying with a friend." "Lauren has a lovely place in Beacon Hill, I understand. $4.2 million for a brownstone seems quite reasonable in this market." David's expression froze. "You've been checking up on her." "Due diligence," I corrected him. "You taught me the importance of knowing who you're dealing with." I set the menu aside. "I'll have the branzino, Paolo, and just water for me, thank you." David ordered mechanically, his mind clearly processing the implications of my research. When Paolo departed, he leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "Sarah, I know you're hurt and angry. You have every right to be. But this doesn't have to be contentious." "I agree completely," I said, unfolding my napkin and placing it in my lap. "In fact, I've been reviewing the settlement agreement. The terms regarding debt assumption are particularly interesting." Relief flickered across his handsome features. "Then you're considering signing?" "I'm considering everything," I replied carefully. "My mother is actively dying, David. The hospice doctor says she likely won't last the week. I have surgery scheduled for next Thursday. The timing of your exit has been challenging." His expression softened with what appeared to be genuine remorse. "I never wanted to hurt you, Sarah. These things, they just happen sometimes. Lauren and I—" "Please," I interrupted, holding up a hand. "Spare me the details of your great love affair. I'm not interested in how magical your connection is or how she completes you in ways I never could." I sipped my water. "What I am interested in is ensuring my financial security moving forward." David nodded eagerly, scenting the possibility of a business-like resolution. "The settlement is generous, Sarah. The Berkshires' property alone is worth over $1 million, and the cash payment is insufficient," I finished for him. "But I'm not interested in fighting over assets." His eyebrows rose in surprise. "You're not?" "No. I've been thinking a great deal about what matters to me at this stage of my life. The house, the investments, they're just things. What I need is freedom from financial stress while I rebuild. Paolo returned with our meals, and we paused our conversation until he departed. David watched me carefully as I took a bite of the perfectly prepared fish. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked cautiously. I dabbed my lips with my napkin before answering. "The debt assumption portion of the agreement is acceptable. In fact, I'd like to expand it." "Expand it?" David's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "I've taken out a home equity line of credit against the house," I said conversationally. "The paperwork was processed yesterday. Since you're keeping the house, and Lauren has so generously offered to assume our debts, it seems logical that this would be included." David's jaw tightened. "How much?" "300,000, I replied, watching his expression carefully. Well within the equity available in the property, I needed to ensure I had operating capital for the next few years. He set his fork down, struggling to maintain his composure. "Sarah, that's not what we discussed." "We haven't discussed anything. David, you left documents on the counter and disappeared to your hotel. Or rather, to Lauren's brownstone." I smiled thinly. "Besides, given your joint financial position, I would think an additional 300,000 would be insignificant." "It's the principle," he argued, lowering his voice as a nearby diner glanced our way. "You can't just unilaterally take out loans against joint property. Actually, I can. Both our names are on the deed and I'm still your legal wife." I took another bite of branzino. "It's perfectly legitimate. Ask your colleagues at Colton and Byrne if you don't believe me." David's knuckles whitened around his water glass. "What game are you playing, Sarah?" "No game," I said, my voice steady. "Just ensuring my future. Since you're so eager to begin yours with Lauren, I assumed you'd be amenable to a small adjustment that expedites the process." Before he could respond, my phone rang. The hospice center. I answered immediately, turning, slightly away from David. "Ms. Chen, it's Nurse Elaine. Your mother's asking for you. She's agitated and we're having trouble calming her." "I'll be right there," I promised, ending the call and gathering my purse. "I have to go. Mom needs me." David's expression warped into one of conflicted frustration. He wanted to continue our discussion but couldn't reasonably object to me rushing to my dying mother's side. "We need to finish this conversation," he insisted, signaling for the check. "I'll call you tomorrow," I replied, already standing. "Think about what I've said, David. The sooner you agree to the adjusted terms, the sooner you and Lauren can begin your new life together." I left him sitting there, the check in his hand, his expression vacillating between outrage and calculation. Phase 2 was now in motion. At the hospice center, Mom was indeed agitated, though she calmed considerably when I arrived. I sat with her through the afternoon, holding her hand as she drifted in and out of consciousness. During one of her lucid periods, she fixed me with a piercing gaze. "Did you see him?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Told him about the HELOC." A ghost of her old mischievous smile crossed her face. "How did he take it?" "About as well as you'd expect," I replied, smoothing her thin hair. "Like someone had kicked his favorite purebred puppy." "Good," she whispered, her eyes drifting closed again. "Make him pay, Sarah. Not just money. Make him understand what he threw away." Later that evening, as Mom slept, I worked from the small desk in her hospice room, my laptop open to a document titled Phase 3. My phone buzzed with multiple messages from David, a progression from irritation to carefully modulated reason to reluctant acceptance. The final message read, "I've spoken with Lauren. We can accommodate the HELOC as part of the debt assumption, but this has to be the final adjustment. No more surprises, Sarah." I smiled to myself as I typed my response. "Thank you for understanding. I've asked Mira Abernathy to review the paperwork. Once she approves, I'll sign." His reply came swiftly. "Who's Mira Abernathy?" "My divorce attorney," I responded simply. There was a long pause before his next message appeared. I thought we were handling this directly to save on legal fees. Translation: I thought you were too emotionally overwhelmed to seek proper representation. Given my current circumstances, I felt professional guidance was prudent, I wrote back. Mira comes highly recommended for complex financial situations. David. Knew exactly who Mira Abernathy was. Her reputation in Boston legal circles was legendary. She'd decimated opposing counsel in the Harrington divorce last year, securing one of the largest settlements in Massachusetts history. The fact that I'd retained her would send a clear message. I wasn't as vulnerable as he'd assumed. I set my phone aside and returned to my planning document. The next phase required perfect timing, and with Mom's condition deteriorating rapidly, I needed to ensure all elements were in place. Jonathan Weiss had called earlier with confirmation that the financial structures were established. Phoenix Capital Management was fully operational, with the requisite accounts and trading authorizations in place. The initial capital injection from Mom's insurance money had been processed, providing the necessary operating funds. A soft knock at the door interrupted my work. Dr. Lakeland entered, his expression somber. Ms. Chen, might I have a word with? You in the hallway? I followed him out, already knowing what he would say. Mom's breathing had changed over the past few hours, becoming more labored, more irregular. We're entering the final stage, he confirmed gently. The transition could be hours or days, but I want you to be prepared. I nodded, surprising myself with my calm. Thank you. I'll stay with her tonight. There's a cot in the room if you need to rest, he offered. The night staff will check in regularly, but they'll try not to disturb you. Back in Mom's room, I settled into the chair beside her bed, taking her fragile hand in mine. Her eyes opened briefly, finding mine with surprising clarity. Still here, she whispered. Always, I promised. The plan? Proceeding perfectly, I assured her. David has agreed to the HELOC. Phase 3 begins tomorrow. She nodded almost imperceptibly, her eyes drifting closed again. My fighter, she murmured. Always 3 steps ahead. I stayed awake through the night, occasionally working on my laptop, but mostly just sitting with Mom, talking softly about memories from my childhood. The small apartment where she'd raised me alone, the weekend trips to the public library, the way she'd worked 2 jobs to ensure I could take SAT prep courses. You gave me everything, I told her as dawn broke, painting the hospice room in soft golden light. Every opportunity, every advantage you could manage. Her breathing had grown increasingly shallow overnight, her periods of consciousness briefer and less coherent. The hospice staff checked in hourly, adjusting her medication to ensure she remained comfortable. At 9:17 a.m., my phone rang. David again. Sarah, we need to finalize this agreement, he said without preamble. Lauren and I are meeting with the realtor this afternoon about a property in Cambridge. The seller wants proof that our current financial obligations are resolved. My mother is actively dying, I replied, my voice flat. Paperwork isn't my priority right now. There was a pause, then David's voice softened artificially. I'm sorry, Sarah. Of course. Is there anything I can do? Yes, I said coldly. You can have your lawyer send the revised agreement to Mira with the HELOC included in the debt assumption section. She'll review it expeditiously. Already done, he replied. I just want to make sure we're on the same page. No more financial surprises. I glanced at Mom's sleeping form, thinking of the documents Jonathan had finalized yesterday, of the transactions scheduled to execute over the next 72 hours. No more surprises, I lied smoothly. After ending the call, I opened my laptop again, sending a brief encrypted message to Jonathan. Green light on Phase 3. Execute as planned. His response came moments later. Transactions initialized. First round complete by end of business today. I closed the laptop just as Nurse Elaine entered with Mom's morning medications. She checked the monitors, adjusting the oxygen flow slightly. She's Comfortable, Elaine assured me. The transition is peaceful. I nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in my throat. For all my strategic planning, for all my focus on ensuring David paid for his betrayal, the reality of Mom's imminent death hit me anew. Soon, I would be truly alone. No mother, no husband, no certainty about my future. Would you like me to call anyone for you? Elaine asked gently. Family? Friends? I shook my head. My closest friend, Melissa, was traveling in Japan for work. My father's family had never acknowledged me after he walked out. David's family had always treated me with the polite distance reserved for a social inferior who had somehow captured their golden boy. It's just me, I said quietly. Elaine squeezed my shoulder before leaving. You're stronger than you think, she said. I see it in you. As the door closed behind her, my phone chimed with an email notification. Mira Abernathy, confirming receipt of the revised settlement agreement from David's lawyer. Debt assumption section now includes the HELOC, she wrote. However, there's an additional clause requiring confirmation that no further loans or encumbrances exist against any joint assets. Clearly, they're trying to prevent further financial maneuvering on your part. How would you like to proceed? I typed my response quickly. I can sign the agreement as written. All relevant financial transactions are already in motion and will be complete before the signing. Technically true. By the time I signed those papers, the debts in question would no longer be directly attached to our joint assets. They would be restructured, repackaged, and redistributed through a series of complex financial instruments that David, for all his legal brilliance, would never see coming. Phase 3 was officially underway. Within 72 hours, the full scope of my strategy would become clear to David and Lauren, but by then, it would be too late for them to stop it. I set my phone aside, turning my attention back to Mom. Her breathing had slowed further, each inhale, a visible effort. I wish you could see how this ends, I whispered, taking her hand again. I think you'd be proud. Outside Mom's window, Boston continued its Monday morning bustle, oblivious to the small dramas unfolding in countless rooms throughout. The city, deaths and births, betrayals and reconciliations, plans made and unmade. Somewhere across town, David and Lauren were likely celebrating their victory, believing they had contained the financial damage of my HELOC maneuver. They had no idea what was coming, but they would. Soon. Mom died at 3:42 p.m. on Tuesday, her hand in mine, her passing so quiet I almost missed the moment her breathing simply stopped. Dr. Lakeland confirmed what I already knew, his voice gentle as he pronounced the time of death. I sat motionless beside her still form, feeling strangely hollow. Would you like some time alone with her? He asked. I nodded, unable to speak. When the door closed behind him, I finally allowed the tears to come. Not the hysterical sobbing I'd half expected, but a quiet, steady flow that felt like the draining of a deep well. It's done, Mom, I whispered, squeezing her hand one final time. I'll make it right. My phone had been silenced, but when I checked it an hour later as the hospice staff prepared to move Mom's body, I found 3 missed calls and several texts from Jonathan Weiss. Phase 3. Transactions 60% complete. Need verbal confirmation for final sequence. I stepped into the hallway to return his call, my voice still rough from crying. I'm sorry about your mother, Jonathan said immediately. Mira called to let me know. Thank you, I replied mechanically. The transactions? Almost complete. The revolving credit lines have been established through Phoenix Capital, and the debt consolidation transfers initiated. We need your authorization. For the final step, the conversion to the Bay State Mutual structure. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Proceed with all remaining transactions. Full implementation. Are you sure? Once this goes through? I'm sure, I interrupted. Complete all transactions as planned. After ending the call, I texted David with the news of Mom's death. His response came quickly. Appropriate condolences, an offer of support, and then, predictably, a question about when we might finalize the divorce paperwork. The services will be Friday, I wrote back. I can meet with the lawyers on Monday to sign everything. His reply bordered on enthusiastic. I'll make the arrangements. Again, I'm so sorry about Elizabeth. She was a remarkable woman. She was, I thought, pocketing my phone. And she raised a daughter more remarkable than you ever understood. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of funeral arrangements, condolence calls, and continuous updates from Jonathan and Mira as Phase 3 unfolded exactly as planned. By Thursday morning, when I checked into the outpatient surgery center for my procedure, the financial restructuring was 90% complete. Everything looks good, the nurse said as she checked my vitals, misinterpreting my slight smile. Dr. Santos is one of our best. You're in excellent hands. I nodded, thinking not of the surgery, but of the financial web now encircling David and Lauren. By Monday, when I signed those divorce papers, the trap would be irreversibly sprung. Melissa arrived from Japan just in time to drive me home from surgery. The procedure had gone smoothly, the benign mass removed, the incision small and neat. I still can't believe he left you while your mom was dying, she fumed as she helped me settle into my hotel suite. I'd refused to return to the house, even to collect more of my belongings. And with that Lauren woman practically taunting you with her money. It's being handled, I assured her, careful not to reveal too much even to my closest friend. Melissa was a corporate compliance officer. The fewer details she knew about my plan, the better for her professional ethics. The funeral's tomorrow, I said, changing the subject. Would you mind picking up my black dress from the cleaners in the morning? After Melissa left, I checked my secure email account. Jonathan had sent the final confirmation. All transactions complete. All financial instruments in place. I opened the attached spreadsheet, reviewing the complex network of debt structures now linked to the assets David and Lauren thought they were securing. My phone buzzed with a text from Mira. Meeting confirmed for Monday, 10 a.m. Their lawyer sent final paperwork today. I've reviewed. All provisions match our requirements. I texted back a simple perfect before taking my prescribed pain medication and settling in for sleep. Friday's funeral was small, but dignified, just as Mom would have wanted. I stood stoically as the few attendees offered condolences, accepting David's awkward hug with detached politeness. Lauren hadn't come, a small mercy. We're still on for Monday? David confirmed quietly as the service concluded. I nodded. 10 a.m. at Mira's office. His eyebrows rose slightly. Not at Colton and Barn? Neutral ground seemed appropriate, I replied coolly. He hesitated, then nodded. Whatever makes this easier for you. If only he knew how much easier he'd made everything for me. Saturday and Sunday passed in a haze of post-surgical recovery and final preparations. Jonathan called Sunday evening with news that made me sit up despite my discomfort. The financial? Markets open tomorrow morning, and that's when they'll first see it, he explained. The initial credit rating adjustments should hit around 9 a.m., an hour before your meeting. Will they understand what's happening? I asked. Not immediately, Jonathan replied, a hint of admiration in his voice. The beauty of this structure is its complexity. It'll take their financial team days to unravel it completely. By then, the papers will be signed, I finished for him, and the debts will be legally transferred. Exactly. But Sarah? His voice turned serious. Once they do understand, they'll be furious. This goes beyond a simple financial maneuver. The way we've leveraged these debt instruments is completely legal, I reminded him. We've verified that repeatedly. Legal, yes, but the impact will be significant, life-altering. That's the point, I said quietly. Monday morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect autumn day. I dressed carefully in a navy Dior suit I'd never worn before, purchased the previous year but saved for a special occasion. This certainly qualified, at 9:07 a.m., as my Uber approached Mira's office building, my phone lit up with a call from David. "What the hell have you done?" he demanded without preamble, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "I'm not sure what you mean," I replied calmly. "I'm on my way to sign the papers as agreed." "Don't play innocent," he hissed. "Lauren just got a call from her bank. Something about debt restructuring and credit rating adjustments linked to our accounts. What did you do, Sarah?" "I simplified our financial arrangements," I said as the Uber pulled up to the curb. "We can discuss the details at the meeting. I've just arrived at Mira's office." I ended the call before he could respond, tucking my phone into my purse as I entered the building. The receptionist directed me to the conference room where Mira was already waiting, documents arranged neatly on the polished table. "They've noticed," I told her without preamble. She nodded, unsurprised. "Sooner than expected, but it changes nothing. The papers are ready for signature." At 9:58 a.m., the conference room door burst open. David stormed in, his normally impeccable appearance slightly disheveled, his face flushed with anger. Behind him came Lauren, the first time I'd seen her in person, and their lawyer, Richard Steinman. "We need to talk before anything is signed," David demanded, privately. "Anything you have to say can be said in front of our legal counsel," I replied evenly, gesturing to the empty chairs across the table. "Please sit. We're scheduled to begin." "Don't act like this is a normal meeting," Lauren interjected, her voice higher and sharper than I'd imagined. "What have you done to our credit accounts?" I studied her with detached interest. Tall, blonde, expensively dressed in a cream Burberry suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. The woman who had happily participated in the destruction of my marriage now looked considerably less confident than her Instagram photos suggested. "I've done exactly what the settlement agreement allowed," I said, turning to Mira. "Shall we proceed with the signing?" "Not until you explain these financial alerts," David insisted, tossing his phone onto the table. On the screen, I could see an email from his financial advisor marked urgent. "Perhaps I can clarify," Mira offered smoothly. "As part of the debt consolidation process outlined in your settlement agreement, certain financial restructuring was required. All perfectly legal and within the parameters established in Section 12, Paragraph 3 of the document you provided." Richard Steinman, David's lawyer, frowned as he flipped through his copy of the agreement. Section 12 refers only to the assignment of existing debts to Mr. Madison and, by extension, to his new household. There's nothing about restructuring. "The agreement doesn't prohibit restructuring prior to assignment," Mira pointed out, her tone professionally pleasant. "And since Mr. Madison and Ms. Westfield so generously offered to assume all debts, Ms. Chen simply consolidated them for more efficient transfer." David's eyes narrowed. "Consolidated how exactly?" I smiled for the first time since entering the room. "Perhaps Jonathan can explain better than I can." On cue, the conference room door opened and Jonathan Weiss entered, carrying a thick folder and a laptop. David's expression shifted from anger to confusion. "John, what are you doing here?" "Providing financial clarity," Jonathan replied, setting up his laptop and connecting it to the room's projection system. "At Sarah's request, I've prepared a complete overview of the debt consolidation and restructuring process implemented over the past week." As the projection screen lit up with complex financial flowcharts, I watched David's face carefully. The moment of realization, when the true scope of what I'd done finally registered, was everything I'd hoped for. His expression shifted from confusion to shock to something approaching horror. "This can't be legal," Lauren whispered, her perfectly manicured hand covering her mouth as she stared at the projected figures. "I assure you it is," Jonathan replied, clicking to the next slide. "Every transaction, every instrument, every structure has been vetted by financial compliance experts. What you're seeing is simply an innovative approach to debt consolidation. Innovative? David's voice cracked with disbelief. You've created a financial black hole. No, I corrected him quietly. I've created exactly what you asked for. A clean break and a comprehensive transfer of debts. You and Lauren agreed to assume all financial obligations. I've merely ensured those obligations are properly structured. As Jonathan continued his presentation, outlining how my student loans, medical bills, the house renovation costs, and the HELOC had been consolidated, leveraged, and restructured through Phoenix Capital Management, David and Lauren sat in stunned silence. The true elegance of the plan was becoming clear to everyone in the room. By signing the divorce agreement today, they would legally bind themselves to nearly $3.2 million in restructured debt, almost 10 times the original amount, and there was absolutely nothing they could do to stop it. "This is extortion," David hissed, shoving back from the conference table. His lawyer, Richard Steinman, placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Careful, David," Richard cautioned. "Nothing illegal has occurred here." "Nothing illegal?" Lauren's voice rose sharply. "She's manipulated our agreement into a financial death sentence." I remained perfectly still, watching the drama unfold with detached interest. Beside me, Mira was the picture of professional calm, her expression betraying nothing as she straightened the documents before her. "Ms. Westfield," Mira addressed Lauren directly, "the agreement you and Mr. Madison proposed explicitly stated that all debts would be assumed by you both. Ms. Chen has simply ensured those debts are structured in a way that protects her interests." Jonathan clicked to the next slide of his presentation. "As you can see, the original debt obligations, student loans, medical bills, home renovation costs, and the HELOC have been consolidated through Phoenix Capital Management and then restructured into leveraged debt instruments." "Phoenix Capital?" David's eyes narrowed. "I've never heard of them." "We're a new entity," Jonathan explained smoothly. "Specializing in innovative debt management solutions." David's gaze snapped to me. "You own Phoenix Capital." It wasn't a question. "Phoenix Capital Management has a complex ownership structure," I replied evenly. "The relevant point is that all debts have been legally acquired, restructured, and are now ready for transfer as per our agreement." "We're not signing this," Lauren declared, looking to Richard for confirmation. "We can't possibly agree to take on... what is it? Over $3 million in debt?" $3.2 million to be precise, Jonathan confirmed. Though the variable interest structures could push it higher depending on market conditions. Richard Steinman cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I believe we should take a brief recess to discuss our options." "Of course," Mira agreed. "We'll give you the room." As we stepped into the hallway, I caught a glimpse of David's face, a mixture of rage, disbelief, and something I'd never seen in him before. Fear. The man who had always controlled every situation, who had planned his exit from our marriage with cold precision, was suddenly facing a future he hadn't anticipated. "They'll try to back out," Mira murmured as we walked toward her private office. "But they have limited options. They've already told the world they're purchasing new property together," I replied. "David's been bragging to colleagues about their fresh start. Lauren's family has been informed. Their social circle knows." "Pride is a powerful motivator," Mira agreed, "especially for people like David and Lauren." In Mira's office, I sank carefully into a chair, mindful of my still healing incision. The emotional strain of the morning, combined with physical discomfort, was beginning to take its toll. "Are you all right?" Mira asked, genuine concern in her voice. "Just tired," I assured her. "It's been a long week." Jonathan joined us, his laptop tucked under his arm. "They're in full panic mode," he reported. "Lauren's on the phone with her financial advisor. David looks like he's about to have a stroke," Good, I said simply. 20 minutes later, Richard Steinman appeared at Mira's door. We'd like to propose an alternative arrangement, he began without preamble. Mira gestured for him to continue. My clients are willing to increase the cash settlement to $500,000 and include both properties, the primary residence and the Berkshire's vacation home, in exchange for Sarah retaining all debt obligations. I shook my head before Mira could respond. Not acceptable. Richard's professional demeanor cracked slightly. Ms. Chen, surely you understand that the current arrangement is untenable. $3 million in debt would financially cripple them. I understand it, I replied coolly. Lauren Westfield's net worth exceeds $20 million. Hardly crippling. Richard's expression confirmed my research had been accurate. Nevertheless, this restructured debt represents a significant burden that wasn't part of the original understanding. The original understanding, I said, my voice hardening, was that my husband wouldn't abandon me while my mother was dying and I was facing a possible cancer diagnosis. The original understanding was that 15 years of marriage deserved more than divorce papers left on a kitchen counter. The original understanding was that vows meant something. The room fell silent. Even Mira seemed taken aback by the controlled intensity of my response. The terms remain as stated in the agreement, I continued after a moment. David and Lauren assume all debts as restructured, or we proceed to a contested divorce where Massachusetts law will entitle me to half of everything, including David's partnership shares in Colton and Byrne, which I understand are valued at approximately $7 million. Richard paled slightly. I'll convey your position to my clients. When he left, Jonathan whistled softly. Remind me never to cross you, Sarah. They'll sign, Mira predicted. The alternative is worse, both. Financially and socially, she was right. After another 30 minutes of heated discussion we could partially overhear through the walls, Richard returned to escort us back to the conference room. David and Lauren sat rigidly side by side, both ashen-faced. The documents lay before them, still unsigned. Before we proceed, David said, his lawyer's composure partially restored. I want to understand why, Sarah. Why this elaborate scheme instead of simply asking for more money in the settlement? Would you have given it to me? I countered. Of course, he insisted. I've always been fair. I smiled thinly. Fair would have been discussing our marriage problems before beginning an affair. Fair would have been waiting until my mother wasn't actively dying before leaving. Fair would have been facing me like a man instead of leaving papers on a counter. Lauren shifted uncomfortably in her chair. This isn't just about money, I continued. It's about consequences. Actions have them. David, you taught me that. David's jaw tightened. And what about your actions? This financial manipulation is perfectly legal, Mira interjected smoothly. Now, shall we proceed with the signing, or would you prefer to move to a contested divorce process? David and Lauren exchanged glances. Whatever silent communication passed between them ended with Lauren giving a barely perceptible nod. We'll sign, David said, his voice flat. Mira efficiently guided them through the process, indicating each signature line with professional detachment. I watched as David's hand shook slightly while signing the page that officially transferred the restructured debt obligations. When the final document was signed, Jonathan collected his presentation materials while Mira organized the paperwork. For filing. Congratulations, I said softly to David and Lauren. You got what you wanted. Each other. Free from me. I hope it was worth the price. Lauren's eyes, when they met mine, held not anger, but something more complex. Perhaps the dawning realization that the man who had betrayed his wife so efficiently might someday do the same to her. This isn't over, David warned as I turned to leave. You've guaranteed yourself a lifelong enemy, Sarah. I paused at the door, looking back at him one last time. No, David. What I've guaranteed is that every time you make a mortgage payment, every time you check your credit score, every time you apply for a loan or a credit card or try to make a major purchase, you'll think of me. For years to come, possibly decades, I'll be there, an invisible presence in your financial life." His face flushed with anger, but I continued before he could respond. "You discarded 15 years of marriage like it was nothing. I've ensured that decision comes with a price tag you'll remember. That seems fair to me." Outside Mira's office building, the autumn sun felt warm on my face. For the first time since finding those divorce papers on my kitchen counter, I felt something like peace. My phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan. "Transfer complete. All debt obligations now legally theirs. You're officially debt-free and $175,000 richer. Congratulations." I smiled to myself, pocketing the phone as I hailed a taxi. Phase 3 had succeeded beyond my expectations. David and Lauren were now legally bound to the financial web I'd created. $3.2 million in restructured debt that would take them years to untangle and decades to pay off. "Where to?" the taxi driver asked. For a moment, I hesitated. Not to the house. It wasn't my home anymore. Not to the hotel where I'd been staying. That chapter was ending. Logan Airport, I decided suddenly. International Terminal. I had no specific destination in mind, just the certainty that it was time for something new. The settlement money combined with Mom's insurance policy gave me financial freedom I hadn't experienced in years. Freedom to travel, to explore, to reinvent myself away from Boston and its painful memories. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, I glanced back at the building where David and Lauren were likely still reeling from the morning's revelations. I felt no triumph, no vindictive joy, only the quiet satisfaction of justice served. David had taught me many things during our marriage, but perhaps the most valuable lesson had come at its end. Never underestimate a woman with nothing left, to lose and the intelligence to make you pay for your mistakes. My phone rang, Melissa checking in after the meeting. "It's done," I told her. "All signed and official." "How do you feel?" she asked cautiously. I considered the question as Boston's familiar skyline receded behind us. "Free," I said finally. "I feel free." "And David and Lauren?" "They got exactly what they deserved," I replied. "No more, no less." "Where are you now?" Melissa asked, clearly hearing the street noise through the phone. "Heading to the airport." "The airport? Sarah, you just had surgery less than a week ago." I smiled at her concern. "Don't worry, I'm not planning to climb Kilimanjaro. Just a change of scenery. Somewhere warm, I think. Somewhere I can heal." After promising to text her my destination once I decided, I ended the call and leaned back against the taxi's seat. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility. Behind lay the wreckage of my marriage and the satisfaction of knowing that David and Lauren would be paying, literally and figuratively, for their betrayal for years to come. It wasn't a perfect ending. But as Mom would have said, it was justice, and sometimes justice is enough. 6 months later, I sat on the veranda of my rented villa in Santorini, watching the Mediterranean sunset paint the white buildings in shades of gold and rose. My laptop was open to a secure email from Jonathan Weiss, containing his quarterly update on what he playfully called the Madison financial situation. "First structured payment came due last month," his email read. "Paid on time, but not without consequences. Sources at Boston Capital Partners indicate Lauren had to liquidate a significant portion of her tech portfolio, at a loss, to cover it. David's been passed over for the managing partner position at Colton and Byrne. Rumor has it the firm was concerned about his financial instability." I sipped my chilled white wine, feeling not the vindictive thrill I might have expected, but a calm satisfaction. The plan had worked exactly as designed, not to destroy them completely, but to ensure they felt the weight of consequence with every financial move they made. My phone chimed with a FaceTime call from Melissa, "You're still disgustingly tan," she complained good-naturedly when I answered. Boston winter showed in her pale complexion and the heavy sweater she wore. "When are you coming home?" "Is it home anymore?" I asked, genuinely curious about my own answer. "Well, your condo renovation should be finished next month," she reminded me. "Unless you've fallen in love with some sexy Greek fisherman and plan to become a Mediterranean housewife." I laughed, adjusting my position to catch the last rays of sunlight. No fisherman, sexy or otherwise, just peace, clarity. The past 6 months had been transformative in ways I hadn't anticipated when I'd impulsively headed to the airport that day. After a month in Bali recovering from surgery, I'd traveled slowly through Southeast Asia, then to Australia, and finally, to Europe. Along the way, I'd rediscovered parts of myself that had been submerged during my marriage. My love of photography, my interest in local economies, my ability to navigate unfamiliar situations with confidence. "Have you heard anything?" Melissa asked carefully. We both knew she was asking about David. "Jonathan keeps me updated," I replied, angling the phone to show her my view. "The debt is doing exactly what it was designed to do, creating a constant, inescapable pressure that colors every financial decision they make. And does that make you happy?" Her tone wasn't judgmental, just curious. I considered the question. "Not happy exactly. Validated, maybe. He treated our relationship, 15 years of marriage, as disposable. Now he's facing consequences that can't be easily discarded." Melissa nodded. "Fair enough. Now, business talk. Have you thought more about Jonathan's proposal?" During my 3rd month of travel, Jonathan had approached me with an unexpected business opportunity. Phoenix Capital Management, the company I'd created for my revenge plan, had caught the attention of several serious financial players who were impressed by its innovative debt restructuring approach. I admitted. "I'm flying to London next week to meet with potential investors. Turns out my method of financial revenge has applications in legitimate debt management and corporate restructuring. From revenge plot to business empire," Melissa laughed. "Only you, Sarah." After we hung up, I remained on the veranda watching darkness settle over the caldera. My life had taken a direction I could never have anticipated when I found those divorce papers on my kitchen counter less than a year ago. The sudden chime of an email alert drew my attention back to the laptop. The sender's name made my breath catch: David Madison. For a moment, my finger hovered over the delete button. Then curiosity won out. "Sarah," the email began without preamble, "I've respected your desire for no communication these past months. Recent developments compel me to break that silence. Lauren and I have separated. The financial situation you engineered has taken its toll, not just economically, but on our relationship. I'm not writing to blame you or seek sympathy, but to acknowledge that I'm beginning to understand the magnitude of what I did to you. The casual cruelty, the thoughtless timing, the betrayal of our years together. I see it now through the lens of consequences. This isn't an attempt at reconciliation. Too much has been broken for that. It's simply an acknowledgement of truth. You deserved better than what I gave you. The debt I'm paying isn't just financial, it's moral. And it should be. David. Closed the laptop without replying. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. David's words stirred complex emotions, not regret for my actions, but perhaps a softening of the hard knot of anger I'd carried for so long. My phone chimed with a text from Jonathan. "London investors confirmed for next Thursday. They're very interested in the Phoenix model. This could be big, Sarah." I smiled to myself, typing back a quick confirmation. The revenge that had initially motivated Phoenix Capital's creation had evolved into something unexpected, a genuine business opportunity built on my financial acumen and strategic thinking. The skills David had dismissed as I'd supported his Career were now positioning me for success in my own right. The next morning, I woke early and hiked down to the small, secluded beach below my villa. The Mediterranean stretched before me, endless blue meeting endless sky. I waded into the cool water, feeling the gentle push and pull of the waves against my legs. For the first time since Mom's death, since David's betrayal, since the surgery, and the divorce and the elaborate revenge, I felt completely present in my own body, my own life. Not defined by what had been done to me or what I had done in response, but simply by who I was in this moment. Sarah Chen, 43 years old, standing at the edge of a new beginning. I thought about David's email, about the separation he'd mentioned. Their relationship had crumbled under the weight of financial pressure just as I'd predicted. The debt I'd engineered had become a constant strain, eroding their connection as surely as water erodes stone. There was a certain poetic justice in it that even my mother would have appreciated. Later that day, as I packed for London, another email arrived. This one from Lauren Westfield. "I won't pretend to deserve your time," she wrote, "but I need to say this. I never fully understood what David did to you until he began doing similar things to me when the financial pressure increased. The casual dismissal, the subtle undermining, the way he makes you doubt your own perceptions. You calculated your revenge perfectly, not just in the debt itself, but in forcing us to face each other's true characters under stress. I'm selling my Beacon Hill property to help clear some of the restructured debt. It seems you'll be getting your pound of flesh after all. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for my role in causing you pain. Lauren." I sat on the edge of my bed, surprisingly moved by her words. Not enough to respond or offer absolution, but enough to recognize the deeper success of my plan. Beyond the financial consequences, I'd created a situation that revealed David's true character to the woman who had helped him betray me. The London meetings exceeded all expectations. By the following week, Phoenix Capital Management had secured $10 million in initial investment to develop specialized debt restructuring products for corporate clients. Jonathan would manage the Boston operations while I established a European office. "To Phoenix Rising," Jonathan toasted at our celebration dinner in Mayfair, raising his champagne glass with a grin. "To unexpected second acts," I amended, clinking my glass against his. 2 years to the day after finding those divorce papers on my kitchen counter, I stood in the lobby of Phoenix Capital's new London headquarters, watching our logo, a stylized phoenix in flight, being installed on the wall. We'd grown to a staff of 28 with offices in Boston, London, and Singapore. The debt restructuring model I'd created for my revenge had been refined into a legitimate financial service that helped struggling companies reorganize their obligations and avoid bankruptcy. My assistant handed me the morning financial news summary as I walked to my office. Buried in the Boston business section was a small item about Colton and Byrne downsizing their corporate office space and letting several partners go, including David Madison. I felt no joy at his downfall, no vindictive satisfaction, only a calm acknowledgement that consequences, both financial and professional, had finally caught up to him. The debt trap I'd set had done its work, leaving him professionally vulnerable when the law firm faced financial challenges. That evening, as I walked along the Thames watching London light up for the night, I drafted a mental email to my mother, telling her about Phoenix Capital's success, about the foundation I'd established in her name to help single mothers return to education, about the life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal. "You were right, Mom," I whispered to the night air. "The best revenge wasn't just making them pay, it was showing myself what I'm capable of building on my own." My phone buzzed with an email notification. The London Business Journal wanted an interview for their Women in Finance special edition. The subject line made me smile. "Rising from the Ashes: How Sarah Chen Built a Financial Empire from Personal Catastrophe." They had no idea how literal that description was. Perhaps someday I'd tell the full story of divorce papers on a kitchen counter of a dying mother's encouragement, of debts restructured into weapons, and of the unexpected liberation that came from calculated revenge. But for now, I was content with the knowledge that some debts can never be fully repaid, but they can be transformed into something powerful, something constructive, something that ultimately serves a purpose beyond simple retribution. David and Lauren had replaced me overnight, thinking they could simply transfer my debts to their new life without consequence. They'd been wrong. And, in proving that, I'd found something far more valuable than revenge. I'd found myself. 5 years after the divorce, I returned to Boston for the first time. The city skyline looked both familiar and foreign as my car crossed the Charles River. New buildings had risen, old landmarks remained, and I felt oddly detached from the place I'd once called home. Phoenix Capital now occupied the entire 32nd floor of a gleaming downtown tower, a far cry from the shell company I'd created for my revenge plan. Jonathan met me in the lobby, his familiar awkward grin now accompanied by the confidence of a successful CFO. "The prodigal founder returns," he joked, embracing me. The team's excited to finally meet the mysterious Sarah Chen in person. I'd built the company remotely, running European operations while maintaining a carefully cultivated distance from Boston. Today marked my first official visit to our American headquarters. "How does it feel to be back?" Jonathan asked as we rode the elevator. "Surreal," I admitted. "Like visiting a previous life." The Phoenix offices were sleek and modern, open workspaces, glass-walled conference rooms, and our logo prominently displayed throughout. 46 employees looked up expectantly as Jonathan led me through the main floor. "Everyone, as promised. Sarah Chen, our founder and CEO," he announced. The applause caught me off guard. These people knew me only through video conferences and my reputation in the financial industry. They didn't know about the divorce, the betrayal, the calculated revenge that had birthed the company. To them, I was simply the visionary who'd pioneered a revolutionary approach to debt restructuring. After the office tour and meetings, Jonathan and I had dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the North End, not Sorellina, where I'd had that fateful lunch with David years ago, but a quiet, family-owned place where we wouldn't be recognized. "So," Jonathan said once we'd ordered, "are you going to ask, or should I just tell you?" I smiled, appreciating his directness. "Tell me." David's working at a small firm in Providence. Took him 18 months to find a position after Colton. And burn. The remaining debt still has him underwater. He'll be paying it off for another decade at least. Jonathan swirled his wine. Lauren remarried last year, tech entrepreneur from Seattle. She managed to negotiate a settlement with the creditors on her portion of the debt. Took a significant hit to her portfolio, but she's largely free of it now. I nodded, absorbing the information with surprising emotional neutrality. And the house? Foreclosed 3 years ago. Sold at auction for less than they owed. The house where I'd planned to grow old with David, where we'd hosted dinner parties and holiday gatherings, where I'd found divorce papers on the kitchen counter. Gone. To strangers at a bank auction. "Does any of this still matter to you?" Jonathan asked carefully. I considered the question. "Not in the way it once did," I finally answered. "It's like reading about characters in a book I put down years ago." After dinner, on impulse, I asked the driver to take me past our old neighborhood. The elegant Beacon Hill townhouses stood unchanged, timeless in their red brick beauty. We slowed as we approached what had been our home. The house looked different. New paint, landscaped front garden, warm lights glowing from windows that once framed my life. A young couple emerged, laughing as they juggled shopping bags and keys. They looked happy, unaware of the history their home contained. "Keep driving," I told the driver softly. Back at my hotel, I found an email waiting from Melissa. She'd moved to San Francisco 3 years ago, but remained my closest friend and confidant. "Saw the Forbes article," she wrote. "The debt whisperer is quite the nickname. Let me know how it feels to be back in Boston. Still hosting the Phoenix Charity Gala tomorrow night? Call me. I want all the details. The Forbes profile had been unexpected. A feature on female founders that positioned me as a financial innovator who'd turned personal setback into professional triumph. They'd gotten the broad strokes right, but missed the vengeful catalyst that had started everything. The next evening, I stood at the podium in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, addressing the 300 guests at Phoenix Capital's annual charity gala. The Elizabeth Chen Foundation, named for my mother, had raised over $4 million for single mothers pursuing higher education, funding scholarships, childcare, and housing assistance. Transformation often begins in our darkest moments, I told the audience. When we think we've lost everything, we sometimes discover what we're truly capable of building. My gaze swept across the elegant crowd, business leaders, financial professionals, philanthropists, and stopped cold on a familiar face near the back of the room. David. He looked older, the silver at his temples now spread throughout his hair. Our eyes met briefly before I continued my speech, my voice steady, despite the unexpected jolt of seeing him. After the formal program, as guests mingled and donated generously to the foundation, I felt a presence at my elbow. "Congratulations on everything you've built," David said quietly. "It's remarkable." I turned to face him, surprised by my own calm. "Thank you. I didn't expect to see you here tonight." "I'm with Hargrove and Associates now," he explained. "Junior. Partner." My boss purchased a table for the gala. The irony was exquisite. David attending an event celebrating the company born from my revenge against him, unknowingly contributing to my success through his firm's donation. "How are you, Sarah?" he asked, his voice carrying a weight of unspoken history. "I'm well," I replied honestly. "Very well, actually." He nodded, glancing around at the evidence of my success. "I can see that." He hesitated, then added, "I wanted to hate you, you know, for what you did with the debt. I tried to for years. And now? Now I understand it was exactly what I deserved." His smile was rueful. 15 years of marriage disposed of in the worst possible way. I'm not proud of the man I was then. A waiter passed with champagne. I declined. David took a glass. "Lauren." "And I lasted less than a year after the signing," he continued. "The financial strain was just the beginning. Once that perfect image cracked, we discovered we didn't actually like each other very much. I heard she remarried," I said neutrally. He nodded. "She found someone better suited to her. Someone who doesn't discard people when they become inconvenient." The self-awareness in his tone surprised me. "And you?" I asked, more out of politeness than genuine interest. "Rebuilding, slowly. The debt you engineered..." He gave a short laugh. "It's quite the masterpiece, you know. My financial advisor still calls it the most elegantly vengeful structure he's ever seen." It became the foundation for Phoenix's business model, I acknowledged. Minus the vengeful intent, of course. "Of course," he echoed, his eyes holding mine. "The ultimate irony. My betrayal launched your empire." Jonathan appeared at my side, protectively professional. "Ms. Chen, the Singapore investors are eager to speak with you." I nodded, turning back to David. "If you'll excuse me." He reached out as if to touch my arm, then stopped himself. "I am sorry, Sarah. Not because of the consequences, but because what I did was wrong. You deserved better. 5 years ago, those words might have meant something. Now they were simply facts, acknowledged too late to matter." "Yes," I agreed simply. "I did." I moved through the remainder of the evening in a strange state of detachment, accepting congratulations and discussing business opportunities while part of my mind processed the unexpected encounter. Later that night, alone in my hotel suite, overlooking Boston Harbor, I opened my laptop and logged into the secure Phoenix system. A few keystrokes brought up the file I sought, David Madison's debt structure, still active, still slowly draining his financial resources year after year. Finger hovered over the keyboard as I considered the options before me. With a few commands, I could adjust the terms, ease the burden that had been following him for 5 years, release him from the consequences I'd so carefully engineered. The David I'd seen tonight was not the man who had discarded me so callously. That man had been humbled, transformed by the very mechanism of my revenge. The debt had done its work, not just financially, but personally. He had changed, so had I. I typed quickly, entering the necessary commands, then sat back as the system processed my instructions. A notification appeared confirming the changes. The debt structure had been modified, interest rates reduced, payment terms extended. Not eliminated. That would have negated the justice of it, but transformed into something more manageable. I closed the laptop, feeling neither triumph nor regret, just a quiet certainty that this chapter was finally ending on my terms. In the morning, I would return to London, to the life and company I'd built from the ashes of betrayal. Boston would remain in my past, a place I'd once called home, the birthplace of both my greatest pain and my most significant transformation. David would receive notification of the debt adjustment within days. He would understand the significance of the gesture, not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement that the scales had balanced, that justice had been served. As I stood at the window watching Boston's lights reflect on the harbor waters, I thought of how far I'd come from that shocked, devastated woman who had found divorce papers on her kitchen counter. The revenge I'd planned had succeeded beyond my expectations, not just in making David pay, but in forging me into someone stronger, more capable, more successful than I'd ever been as his wife. Sometimes, I reflected, the most powerful response to betrayal isn't just making the betrayer suffer, it's ensuring they witness your transformation into someone they can never touch again. In that, my revenge was truly complete. 7 years after the divorce, Phoenix Capital Management hosted its annual Global Leadership Summit in Singapore. As CEO, I opened the conference with a keynote on transformative financial structures in uncertain markets. 200 of our employees from offices in 12 countries filled the hotel ballroom, a testament to how far we'd come from our unlikely beginnings. Financial innovation often emerges from crisis, I told the audience. The most powerful solutions are born when conventional approaches fail us. No one except Jonathan knew just how personally I had tested that theory. After the keynote, during a brief moment alone in the executive lounge, I checked my secure messaging system. Jonathan had sent our quarterly Madison update, a tradition that had evolved from detailed financial surveillance to brief, factual notes. David's firm made him full partner last month, the message read. Debt restructure you authorized 2 years ago has stabilized his situation. He's purchased a modest condo in Providence. FYI, Lauren's tech husband took her company public. Stock opened at $87. I closed the message without responding. These updates had become increasingly infrequent and increasingly irrelevant to my life. While I never requested Jonathan stop sending them, we both recognized they served little purpose, now beyond historical curiosity. Ms. Chen? My assistant appeared at the doorway. The panel on emerging markets begins in 5 minutes. I nodded, gathering my materials. Thank you, May. As I moved through the conference, greeting colleagues and discussing business strategies, I reflected on how thoroughly I had reinvented myself. The woman who had once defined herself as David Madison's supportive wife now led a global financial firm with assets under management exceeding $2 billion. The revenge that had initially fueled Phoenix's creation had been transformed into legitimate business innovation recognized throughout the industry. That evening, I had dinner with our Asia Pacific leadership team at a rooftop restaurant overlooking Singapore's spectacular skyline. As the conversation flowed around investment opportunities and market projections, My phone buzzed with an incoming email. The sender's name made me pause. Lauren Westfield Jenkins. I excused myself and stepped away to read the message privately. Sarah. It began. You don't owe me your attention, but I hope you'll read this. My husband's company is launching a foundation focused on supporting women entrepreneurs after divorce or major life transitions. Given Phoenix Capital's similar initiatives through the Elizabeth Chen Foundation, we'd like to explore potential collaboration. This isn't about making amends, that ship sailed long ago, but about creating something meaningful from our shared history. The financial education program you've built for women navigating post-divorce finances is exactly the kind of model we'd like to expand globally. If you're willing to discuss this, I'd appreciate the opportunity. Regards, Lauren. I stared at the message, caught between disbelief and grudging admiration for her audacity. The woman who had helped destroy my marriage now wanted to partner with me professionally, leveraging the very success I'd built from that destruction. Back at my hotel suite, I drafted and deleted 3 different responses before setting my phone aside. This required careful consideration, not an emotional reaction. The next morning, as I jogged along Singapore's Marina Bay, the first hints of dawn coloring the sky, I gained clarity about Lauren's proposal. The businesswoman in me recognized the potential benefits: expanded resources for the foundation, greater reach for our programs, positive publicity. The woman who had orchestrated an elaborate financial revenge balked at any collaboration with Lauren. But 7 years had passed. I was no longer defined by what David and Lauren had done to me, but by what I had built afterward. After my run, I composed a brief professional response. Lauren, thank you for reaching out. The Elizabeth Chen Foundation would be interested in learning more about your initiative. My executive director, Amara Wilson, will contact you to arrange an initial discussion. Sarah Chen, CEO, Phoenix Capital Management, neither rejection nor enthusiasm, simply business. Later that day, between summit sessions, I called Melissa, who now headed our San Francisco office. Lauren Westfield reached out about a foundation. Partnership, I told her without preamble. You're kidding, Melissa replied, her tone incredulous. The audacity of that woman. It's been 7 years, I said, surprising myself with my measured response. The foundation work is important. If her resources can help more women, does it matter where they come from? Look at you, all evolved and mature, Melissa teased, though I detected genuine admiration in her voice. Can I remind you that this is the woman who helped your husband replace you while your mother was dying? Trust me, I haven't forgotten, I assured her. But I'm not that wounded woman anymore. Haven't been for a long time. So you're actually considering it? I'm considering what serves the foundation best, I clarified. Let Amara handle the preliminary discussions. If it has potential, I'll decide then whether I can separate the personal history from the professional opportunity. After ending the call, I rejoined the conference, focusing on Phoenix's future rather than my past. By the summit's conclusion 3 days later, we had finalized expansion plans for South America and the Middle East, approved a new debt restructuring, product for distressed municipalities, and recruited 3 top financial analysts from our competitors. On my flight back to London, I reviewed the Foundation's latest impact report. The Elizabeth Chen Foundation had funded education for over 700 single mothers, provided emergency housing for 200 families in crisis, and launched a financial literacy program that had reached thousands of women navigating post-divorce finances. Mom would have been proud of how her insurance money had been leveraged, first as the seed capital for my revenge, then as the foundation for a philanthropic legacy that bore her name. She had always believed in poetic justice. A month after the Singapore summit, I received a formal proposal from Lauren's husband's foundation. Amara had vetted it thoroughly and recommended proceeding with a limited pilot collaboration. The synergies are undeniable, Amara explained during our video call. Their resources combined with our programs could double our impact within 18 months. And Sarah, she hesitated. Lauren has offered to recuse herself from any direct involvement if that would make you more comfortable. I appreciated the consideration but recognized it as unnecessary. That won't be required. This is business, not personal. The words came easily because they were true. Lauren Westfield Jenkins was no longer the woman who had helped destroy my marriage. She was simply another business contact, neither friend nor enemy. The pilot program launched 3 months later, focusing on financial education for women going through divorce. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who had replaced me was now funding programs inspired by the revenge I'd enacted against her. Life's circles were sometimes perfect in their symmetry. In December, Phoenix Capital opened its newest office, in Toronto. During the celebration, Jonathan pulled me aside, champagne flute in hand. "Have you seen this?" he asked, showing me his tablet. On the screen was a business news article profiling David's law firm's expansion into international markets. "No," I admitted. "I haven't been keeping track." "There's a quote from him I thought you might find interesting," Jonathan said, scrolling to highlight a paragraph. David's words appeared in neat, digital print. "My approach to client relationships was transformed by personal experience with financial restructuring. When you've navigated complex debt obligations personally, you develop a different perspective on what clients need during financial challenges." I handed the tablet back to Jonathan, a small smile playing at my lips. "Sounds like he learned something, after all." "From the best in the business," Jonathan replied, raising his glass in a subtle toast. Later that evening, after the celebration wound down, I stood alone on the balcony of our new offices, looking out at Toronto's winter skyline. Snow fell gently, muffling the city sounds. My phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. "Saw the press release about the foundation collaboration with Lauren's group. You okay with all this?" I considered the question, watching my breath form clouds in the cold air. "More than okay," I typed back. "It feels like the final piece falling into place." And it was true. The revenge that had once consumed my thoughts had evolved into something I could never have anticipated. A successful global company, a foundation helping women rebuild their lives, and eventually, a strange kind of peace. David and Lauren had replaced me overnight, thinking they could simply transfer my debts to their new life without consequence. Instead, those debts had become the catalyst for my transformation and, ultimately, their own. The circle was complete. The debt, financial, emotional, moral, had been paid in full. And I, Sarah Chen, was finally, completely free. 10 years to the day after finding those divorce papers on my kitchen counter, I stood at the podium of Harvard Business School's MacArthur Auditorium, addressing the graduating class as their commencement speaker. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd once deferred my own ambitions to support David's career at this very institution. Transformation rarely follows the path we expect, I told the sea of eager faces before me. Often, our greatest innovations emerge from our deepest setbacks. From my vantage point, I could see Phoenix Capital's Chief Operating Officer, Amara Wilson, sitting among the distinguished guests. Beside her was Melissa, who now headed our North American operations, and Jonathan, my ever-loyal CFO. 10 years ago, I couldn't have imagined this moment or these allies who had helped build an empire from the ashes of betrayal. After the ceremony, as I chatted with faculty and students at the reception, Harvard's Dean of Business approached with a familiar figure in tow. "Ms. Chen, I believe you know Professor Madison? He's been leading our course on ethics in corporate restructuring this semester." David looked older, but well, distinguished gray at his temples, the lines around his eyes deeper, but his posture still straight, confident. He extended his hand professionally. "Congratulations on your speech, Sarah. It was powerful." I accepted his handshake, noting the absence of the emotional jolt such contact might once have triggered. "Thank you, David. I didn't realize you were teaching here." "Just this semester," he explained. "A visiting professorship alongside my work in Providence." The dean excused himself to greet other guests, leaving us in a moment of unexpected privacy. A decade of history hung between us, simultaneously, significant and irrelevant. "Your foundation's work with women navigating post-divorce finances is remarkable," David said. "I actually reference it in my ethics class as a model program." "That's unexpected," I admitted. He smiled slightly. "I've been following Phoenix Capital's evolution for years. What you've built is extraordinary." "Thank you," I replied, genuine but reserved. "The debt restructuring you engineered?" He hesitated, then continued with surprising candor. "It was brilliant, Sarah. Brutal, but brilliant. It took me 3 years just to understand its full complexity, and another 2 years to stabilize your finances," I added, letting him know I was still informed about his situation. He nodded, accepting this without surprise. The irony is that struggling with that debt made me a better lawyer, a better teacher. It forced me to understand financial frameworks from the client's perspective. A young graduate approached, eager to speak with me, and David stepped back with a slight nod of acknowledgement. Our brief conversation, likely our last, had closed a circle neither of us had anticipated. That evening, I hosted a small dinner at a restaurant near campus for the Phoenix team who had attended the commencement. As we celebrated with champagne, Melissa leaned over to me. "So, you and David looked civil. No bloodshed, no financial warfare. How disappointing," she teased. 10 years is a long time," I replied. "The woman who engineered that revenge barely exists anymore." "Oh, she exists," Melissa countered with a knowing smile. "She's just evolved into something even more formidable." Later that night in my hotel suite, I received a text from an unknown number. "The student who approached you after our conversation today was Jessica Martinez. She's writing her thesis on financial resilience after divorce. Your foundation changed her mother's life. Thought, you should know." David, I saved the message but didn't respond. Some acknowledgments required no reply. The next morning, before flying back to London, I made an unplanned detour. The taxi driver seemed confused when I gave him the address of a cemetery on the outskirts of Boston, but he drove in silence, respecting my privacy. Mom's grave was simple but elegant, a black granite headstone with her name and the dates that bookended her life. I placed white peonies, her favorite, against the stone. "It's been 10 years, Mom," I said quietly. 10 years since everything fell apart and somehow put me on the path to building something stronger. The morning air was cool, the cemetery peaceful. Birds sang in the trees overhead as I told my mother about Phoenix Capital's global expansion, about the foundation that bore her name, about the thousands of women whose lives had been changed through our programs. "You were right about revenge," I admitted to her silent stone. "It wasn't just about making them pay. It was about discovering what I could build from nothing." As I turned to leave, I noticed a small arrangement of yellow roses already placed beside my peonies. Attached was a card that simply read, "To the mother of an extraordinary woman. Thank you for raising her to be stronger than the challenges she faced." LWJ, Lauren Westfield Jenkins had somehow known I would visit today. The gesture, acknowledging. My mother's role in shaping the woman who had orchestrated her financial downfall was unexpected and strangely moving. On the flight back to London, I reviewed Phoenix Capital's latest quarterly reports. We had expanded to 15 countries. Our foundation work had reached over 10,000 women, and our innovative debt restructuring models had been adopted by financial institutions worldwide. None of it would have existed if David hadn't left. Those divorce papers on our kitchen counter 10 years ago. None of it would have emerged if Lauren hadn't agreed to take on my debts, thinking it a simple transaction rather than the trigger for an elaborate financial trap. My phone buzzed with an email from Amara. The Jenkins Foundation has formally proposed expanding our collaboration to include a global scholarship program for women in finance. Their initial commitment is $10 million over 5 years. Lauren has requested a planning meeting in London next month. How would you like to proceed? I smiled to myself, appreciating the continuing ironies of my professional connection to Lauren. The woman who had helped destroy my marriage was now helping fund educational opportunities for women facing similar challenges. Schedule the meeting, I replied. I'll attend personally. That evening, as my plane crossed the Atlantic, I opened my laptop to review a draft of my upcoming book, Phoenix Rising: Financial Strategies for Women in Transition. The publisher had urged me to include more personal background, to explain what had inspired my passion for helping women navigate financial challenges after divorce. I'd been reluctant, preferring to keep my professional success separate from my personal history. But perhaps the time had come to acknowledge how the two were inextricably linked, how a perfect storm of betrayal, grief, and calculated revenge had transformed into a global financial empire and philanthropic legacy. Began typing a new introduction. 10 years ago, I found divorce papers on my kitchen counter while my mother was dying in hospice care. My husband had replaced me overnight, thinking he could simply transfer my debts to his new life without consequence. What followed was not just a divorce, but a financial reckoning that would change the trajectory of all our lives. This is not a story of revenge, though it began that way. It's a story of transformation, of debts paid and rebalanced, of power reclaimed, of building something meaningful from betrayal's ashes. The strategies outlined in this book emerged from that crucible. They are tested not just in boardrooms and investment portfolios, but in the most personal financial battlefield imaginable, the dissolution of a marriage and the rebuilding of a life. The words flowed easily now, the story no longer painful. To recall, what had once been a raw wound had healed into something else. Not a scar, but a foundation. Strong, solid, enduring. As the plane continued eastward toward London, toward the future I had built for myself, I thought about the circular nature of debt and payment, of loss and creation. David and Lauren had taken something from me, but, in responding to that loss, I had discovered resources within myself I might never have found otherwise. The debt had been paid in full, not just the financial obligations I'd so carefully restructured and transferred back to them, but the deeper, moral debt created by betrayal. In the decades since, we had all been transformed by its repayment. David had found humility and a new perspective that made him a better lawyer and teacher. Lauren had channeled her wealth into meaningful philanthropy. And I had built an empire that helped thousands of women reclaim their financial power after similar betrayals. The revenge I'd orchestrated had succeeded beyond my wildest expectations, but not in the way I'd initially imagined. Its true success wasn't measured in David and Lauren's financial struggles, but in the woman I had become in the process. A woman my mother would have been proud to see. A woman even my younger self couldn't have imagined becoming. Some debts, once paid, leave both parties richer for the transaction. This, perhaps, was the ultimate lesson of the past 10 years, and the most unexpected outcome of a revenge plan born from heartbreak and executed with calculated precision. The debt had been paid, and we were all somehow the better for it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.